Content warning. This audiobook contains strong language, sexual themes, supernatural elements, and graphic depictions of death. The author recommends this work for audiences aged 18 and over. If you let your 6-year-old listen, that's on you. Dark Matter, The Order of the Hidden Cross, by Ian Bailey, published by Ashlar Press. Copyright 2025. Chapter 18. The Shadow's Deception. It was late in the evening, and Zivah and Ashlar sat together in her family's tent, the air thick with the scent of evening spices and the soft glow of oil lamps reflecting off richly woven tapestries. The warmth of the day lingered, but it only added to the heaviness between them. Ashlar tried to meet Zivah's eyes, smiling, teasing her in an effort to break the unease that seemed to radiate from her every movement. "You know," he said, voice light but edged with nervous energy, "sometimes I still can't believe we're getting married. There was a time I thought I'd be sent off to become a priest. Imagine that." He chuckled, leaning closer, the warmth of his presence an unspoken reassurance. "You saved me, Zivah. You saved me from that path, and I'll be forever grateful. I can't wait to be with you. Truly." Zivah's hands stilled, and her eyes, once distant, snapped back to meet his. There was no mirth there, no relief. Instead, there was a flicker of fear, of panic, as if his words had triggered something she could no longer hold back. "Ashlar!" Her voice wavered, and the calm he tried to create shattered in an instant. "Ashlar, I'm pregnant." Ashlar's smile faded as if stolen from his face. His breath hitched, heart pounding in his chest. "How?" The word felt stupid and insufficient, and it tumbled out of his mouth without thought. They had been waiting, saving themselves for their wedding night, which was only weeks away. Zivah's eyes brimmed with tears, and she shook her head, the silver clasp in her hair trembling with her. "I don't know how it happened. I had a dream so vivid, so real." Her voice broke as she recounted the night she was overtaken by something or someone in her sleep. "I thought it was just a dream, but then my body changed, and I knew it couldn't have been just that." Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I know how it sounds, Ashlar. I know you won't believe me, but I swear it was no one else. I would never—" Ashlar's world tilted and spun. His thoughts fractured and crumbled like a vase dropped from a great height, shattering on impact. He searched Zivah's eyes, desperate for some clue that this was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. But all he saw was sincerity and fear. His mind screamed at the impossibility, but his heart still ached for her, the woman he loved beyond all things. He wanted to believe her, to wrap her in his arms and protect her from whatever terror she faced. But the doubt, it gnawed at him like an unseen rat, burrowing deeper with every word she spoke. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked with the weight of disbelief. "How can I know this is true?" The words came out sharp, cutting through the fragile thread of composure they shared. He didn't want to hurt her, didn't want to accuse her. But how could he reconcile this? Was this dream an elaborate story to cover a betrayal? How could he trust a vision, a nightmare, over the reality they shared? Unable to make sense of the storm inside him, Ashlar abruptly stood. The silence that followed was a terrible, fragile thing. Zivah reached out, fingers trembling, but her voice faltered and the tears that had gathered in her eyes spilled down her cheeks. She did not plead, did not beg, but her look was an agony of unspoken desperation. But he couldn't face her, not like this. He turned and walked out of the tent into the cool night air, leaving behind the only woman he had ever truly loved. That night, Ashlar returned to his family's tent, and from that moment on, he did not speak to Zivah again. In the days that followed, the shadows of doubt and rage tangled around Ashlar's thoughts. He could find no peace. Every fleeting memory of Zivah, every shared smile and whisper of love was now tainted with the ghost of her confession. The story she told, the dream that left her with child, was absurd, impossible, and yet it was there, lurking at the edges of his thoughts like a serpent ready to strike. What if? What if it were true? What did that mean for him, for them, for the life they had promised to build together? Ashlar couldn't bear it. Each day felt like a battle between the love he bore for Zivah and the creeping suspicion that clung to him like oil he couldn't wash away. One moonless night, as he sat outside his family's tent by the fire pit, staring into the erratic dance of the flames, a chill wrapped around him, unnatural and biting. He rubbed his arms, glancing around uneasily. At first it seemed like a trick of the firelight, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision, a shadow twisting in a way that defied the natural world. Ashlar's heart pounded. He turned to leave when a voice, smooth as silk and dark as poisoned honey, whispered from the edge of the darkness. "Ashlar!" He froze, turning slowly. "Who's there?" he called, but the firelight revealed nothing but empty night. A shadow shifted again, dancing at the edge of the fire's glow, twisting and reshaping itself into a figure cloaked in darkness so deep it swallowed the light around it. The figure's outline was only vaguely human, but it was the eyes that glimmered like cold steel in the dark, that gripped him with a fear he had never known. "I am a friend," the figure spoke, its voice calm and almost soothing, a voice that slithered into his thoughts like an unwelcome guest. "I know what troubles you. I know the pain in your heart, Ashlar." Ashlar's fists clenched, the veins in his neck tightening. "What do you know of my pain?" he spat, but his voice betrayed him. It trembled. The figure stepped closer, the darkness around him swirling like a living cloak. "The child that Zivah carries is not yours." Anger flared hot in Ashlar's chest. He took a step toward the figure, wanting to strike out, to force the shadow to retreat, but his hands fell limp by his sides. "How do you know that? How could you possibly know what happened?" The figure's voice lowered to a silken whisper, a comforting lie wrapped in poison. "Because I have seen what you have not." Not all dreams are harmless, Ashlar. Some dreams take root, twisting themselves into the waking world in ways we cannot understand. But there is a way to know the truth, to uncover the deception. Ashlar felt trapped, desperate. The words clawed at him like a thorn bush, entangling his thoughts. "What do you want me to do?" he demanded, voice shaking. How do I find out?" "You must go to the forest," the figure said, leaning in so close that Ashlar felt the icy chill of its breath on his face. "Seek out the shaman who lives beyond the mountains. He alone has the power to see through lies, to reveal what has truly happened." I don't understand," Ashlar stammered, the shadow seeming to creep closer around him, tightening. "You expect me to believe you? Why should I trust anything you say?" He wanted to sound resolute, to reclaim control, but the fear laced his voice like venom. A low, sinister chuckle emanated from the figure, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I do not ask you to trust me blindly. Trust the doubt in your own heart, Ashlar. Trust the unease that gnaws at you when you think of the child." The figure's voice coiled around him, seductive, sinister. "Tell me, do you not feel that something is amiss? That there is more to Zivah's story than what she has told you?" Ashlar's throat tightened. The figure's words were a knife to his soul, cutting deep into the doubts he had tried to bury. He could not deny it. The questions, the confusion. "What do you want from me?" His voice was barely more than a whisper. "What I want is what you want, Ashlar. The truth. Zivah is hiding something from you, and you deserve to know. You loved her, didn't you?" The figure's voice softened, coaxing. "Or perhaps you still do." Of course I do, Asher's shout tore through the stillness. I love her more than anything. That's why this hurts so much. Precisely, the figure whispered, and though its face was hidden in shadow, Asher could almost sense a smile forming. If you love her, you must face the truth, no matter how bitter it may be. I am offering you a way to lift the veil of lies that clouds your mind. Asher stepped closer, his face inches from the darkness. Why help me? What's in it for you? Why do you care about me, about Zivah? For a moment there was silence as the figure weighed its words carefully. Once, I too was a man deceived, a man who lost everything because I did not see clearly. I have seen the pain that lies can cause, Asher. I would not wish that fate upon you. And if I go, Asher asked finally, voice trembling, if I find this shaman, will he truly show me what happened to Zivah? The figure leaned even closer, its presence like a cold wind wrapping around Asher's soul. The shaman sees beyond what others cannot. He will reveal to you what is hidden, strip away all deceit. But you must be prepared, Asher. The truth is often a bitter thing. It can cut deeper than any blade. Asher's eyes dropped to the ground, thoughts spinning like a storm. I can't just leave, he said, his voice barely audible. My family, Zivah. Sometimes, to protect those we love, sacrifices must be made, the figure said, its voice like a whisper from the depths of the abyss. This journey could save Zivah from a pain she has not yet felt. When you return, the path will be clear. You will know what must be done. But what if the truth? What if it's worse than I can bear? Then you will be stronger for it, the figure replied darkly. The shaman will reveal what has been hidden and show you the path only you can walk. The shadow man started to dissipate while saying, whatever you find, Asher, you will be free. Free from the chains of uncertainty that bind you now. Asher now sat alone outside his family's tent, staring at the dying embers of the fire pit. Every flicker of the flames seemed to pull him deeper into his thoughts, thoughts that had grown darker and more tangled with each passing day. He tried to make sense of Zivah's words, of the dream she claimed had left her with child, but every explanation seemed to unravel like loose threads in his hands. How could something like this happen? How could a dream carry flesh and blood into the world? A few nights later, everyone had retired for the night, leaving Asher in a heavy silence that only served to amplify his fears. He dropped his head into his hands, wrestling with the storm raging inside his heart, the anger, the doubt, the love that refused to let go. The cool night air felt sharp against his skin, and just when Asher thought he might suffocate under the weight of his own thoughts, he felt it, a coldness that settled over him, creeping into his bones like a shadow. Asher! The voice was unmistakable, the same voice that had whispered to him a few nights before, leading him into darkness. Asher's eyes snapped open, and there, standing just beyond the circle of the dying fire, was the shadow figure. You again, Asher muttered, clenching his fists to stop his hands from trembling. He rose to his feet, his voice low and edged with fear. What do you want from me? Why won't you leave me alone? The shadow figure's form twisted slightly, the darkness around him deepening until his outline blurred, as though he were part of the very night itself. I come to offer you what you seek. Truth, the figure whispered, his voice smooth, almost kind. You must leave, Asher. Find the shaman, and all will become clear. Asher's face tightened with anger and desperation. And what then? You expect me to just walk away from everything, my family, Zivah. They'll question why I'm gone. My family will think I've abandoned them, and Zivah, she'll think I've left her for good. How can you ask me to do this? The shadow figure's voice was steady, unyielding. You know that you cannot stay. Not like this. You cannot raise a child that is not yours, nor can you live with the burden of doubt that eats away at your heart. Doubt? Ashlar spat, taking a step closer. You've planted that doubt. Before you, I never... Before me, you were already doubting, Ashlar, the figure interrupted smoothly. I only spoke the words that you dared not say aloud. Tell me, when Zivah confessed to you, when she told you of her dream, did you truly believe her? Or was there a voice inside of you, a voice that whispered lies? Ashlar's jaw clenched and he looked away, unable to meet the figure's eyes. He wanted to deny it, to shout that Zivah had never lied to him before. But in the depths of his heart, the truth clawed its way to the surface. He had doubted her. Even as he tried to comfort her, to believe her story, a part of him had screamed that none of it made sense, that she was hiding something. The figure's voice softened, almost coaxing. You must know the truth. Not just for yourself, but for Zivah, for the life you would build together. Do you truly wish to bind yourself to lies, or would you rather face the truth, no matter how dark? Ashlar's face twisted in pain as the weight of his choices pressed down on him. And what about my family? He whispered. If I leave now without any explanation, they'll think I've gone mad. They'll never understand. Your family will grieve, the figure said, the words rolling off his tongue like a prophecy. But they will forgive. You are not abandoning them, Ashlar. You are protecting them. And you are protecting yourself. This path is not an easy one, but it is the only way to make sense of what has been hidden from you. But Zivah... Ashlar's voice broke, the love he still held for her clinging to his every word. What will she think? She'll believe I've forsaken her. She'll hate me. The figure drew closer, his form still obscured in shadow, but the faint glimmer of his eyes piercing through the darkness. Zivah will understand in time, and if she truly loves you as you love her, then she will wait. When you return, all will be made right. The lies will fall away like leaves, and the truth will bloom between you. But only if you go now. A silence hung between them, heavy and filled with unspoken fears. Ashlar could hear his own breathing, could feel his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. What would become of him if he left? Would he ever be able to return? He looked toward the flap of the tent, toward the camp that lay beyond, the people he'd leave behind, the life that was slowly crumbling around him. And if I don't go, Ashlar asked finally, his voice barely louder than a whisper. What if I stay? Then you will never know, the figure said, his voice darkening like a storm cloud rolling over the horizon. You will live a life shrouded in shadows, tied to a child that is not your own, a future built on a foundation of lies. But you already know this. Deep down you have always known. You cannot unsee what has been revealed. Ashlar closed his eyes, the truth of those words seeping into him like poison. The figure's voice, the doubts he carried, the confusion that tore at his heart. It was all too much. He needed to know, to see clearly. And if this journey, this one journey, was the only way to uncover what had happened, then he had no choice. The figure seemed to sense his resolve and stepped back, the shadows around him swirling like tendrils of smoke. Follow the moon until it begins to wane. Cross 3 rivers and find the path where the trees grow so dense that no sunlight touches the earth. There the shaman waits. And when you find him, he will know why you have come. Ashlar looked down at his feet, his mind racing through the consequences of this decision. It felt as though he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and before him lay a drop into the unknown. But he could not live like this. He could not bear the torment of doubt any longer. All right, he said at last, his voice cracking with the weight of it. I'll go. The shadow figure's form seemed to swell with approval, and for a moment Ashlar could almost swear that he saw a smile, a glimmer of satisfaction flickering in the darkness. Good. the figure murmured, his voice like a breeze that chills the soul. "The truth will set you free, Ashlar, and when you return, you will know what must be done." And then, as quickly as he had appeared, the shadow figure faded away, leaving Ashlar standing alone in the cold, empty silence of the night. Ashlar's decision was not made easily, but when dawn broke, he was ready. With the shadows of his past trailing behind him like a curse, he left the camp without a word. The voice of the shadow figure still echoed in his ears, cold and clear. For Zivah, for the truth, for the child. The night cloaked Ashlar as he made his way out of the camp, the soft murmur of the sleeping village behind him, fading into silence. He could not afford to think about Zivah, to think about the grief in her eyes when he left her, or the unanswered questions his absence would stir in his family. Those thoughts were daggers, and if he let them cut too deep, he might lose his resolve. With every step he took, the shadow figure's words filled his mind like a drumbeat. For Zivah, for the truth, for the child. He repeated the words like a mantra, trying to will away the doubts that clawed at his sanity. He needed to find this shaman. He needed answers. The figure's directions rang in his mind, haunting and strange. Follow the moon until it wanes, cross 3 rivers, and seek the place where no sunlight touches the ground. He hesitated at the edge of the camp, turning back one last time to look at the tent where Zivah lay. His heart clenched painfully as he imagined her waking to find him gone. Could he truly leave her? Would she ever understand why? Yet the shadow's words gnawed at his mind. You must know the truth. Trust the doubt in your heart. The weight of that doubt crushed him as he took his first step into the night. The first night, Ashlar walked until the world around him seemed like a blur, moving as though in a fevered dream. The moon hung heavy in the sky, and he followed it as if tethered to its glow, never looking back. As the days passed, the landscape changed. Trees twisted into unrecognizable shapes, their branches hanging like skeletal hands, reaching down to claw at him as he moved. The forest seemed alive, its gnarled branches reaching like skeletal hands, the brambles tangling his legs as though urging him to turn back. The air grew heavier with each step, carrying whispers he dared not follow. And when he slept, when exhaustion forced him to rest for a few hours at a time, the dreams came. Dreams of darkness, dreams of a shadow figure with eyes like polished stone, watching him from the edge of the firelight, and dreams of Zivah, her voice calling out to him from somewhere far away, echoing through endless tunnels of black. But every time he reached for her, she was swallowed by the dark, and he would awaken with a start, sweat-soaked and trembling. After crossing the 3rd river, Ashlar entered a part of the forest that felt different, older, as if it had stood for centuries without the touch of man. The trees grew so close together that they formed a thick canopy above, blotting out the sky. And here he felt it, a presence, a watchful silence that hung around him like a shroud. He trudged through the underbrush until he could go no further, and then he saw it, a clearing ahead like an eye of calm in a sea of madness. In the center of the clearing stood the cottage. Small, crooked, and weathered, it looked like it had sprouted from the earth itself, the moss and vines clinging to its wooden frame like flesh to bone. Smoke drifted from the chimney, spiraling upward into the darkness. Ashlar felt a shiver of foreboding, but he had come too far to turn back now. The cottage crouched in the clearing, its moss-covered frame blending with the forest as though it had always been there. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the air seemed to hold its breath as Ashlar approached. Each step felt like a descent into some unknown pit. Before he could knock, the door swung open as if pulled by invisible hands, revealing a dimly lit interior. There stood an old man, bent with age, but his eyes, those eyes were sharp, too sharp, cutting into Ashlar like blades. The shaman wore a cloak of deep red, frayed at the edges, and around his neck hung a cord strung with bones and feathers that rattled softly as he moved. "Ashlar," the shaman said in a voice that was both a whisper and a growl, as if he spoke from somewhere deep below the earth. "I have been expecting you." Ashlar faltered on the threshold, his hand trembling as it hovered over the doorframe. "How do you know my name?" His voice came out hoarse and cracked, sounding like it belonged to someone else. The shaman's lips curled into a smile, revealing yellowed teeth. "I know many things," he replied with an unnerving calm that seemed to still the very air around them. "Come inside, sit with me. I will brew you a tea, and all will become clear." Hesitant but desperate for answers, Ashlar stepped inside, the warmth of the cottage wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. The walls were lined with jars and dried plants, roots and powders of colors he'd never seen before. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of herbs, incense, and something far more pungent, like the rotting bark of a dead tree. In the center of the room, a low burning hearth cast flickering shadows across the wooden floor, making them dance like tortured souls. The shaman gestured toward a rough wooden stool by the hearth, and Ashlar sat down, his muscles taut with tension. The shaman snapped his fingers, and without warning, a porcelain cup floated from a nearby shelf, borne by unseen hands. It came to rest before Ashlar, and steam curled upward from the tea, carrying with it a scent both sweet and earthy. Ashlar stared, his eyes wide, at the floating cup, disbelief mixing with a childlike wonder. His instincts screamed at him to run, to leave this cursed place. But something else, a compulsion he could not explain, kept him there. "Drink," the shaman said softly, his voice a lullaby of venom. "It will calm your spirit and open your mind to what you must see." Ashlar's hands shook as he lifted the cup to his lips. The tea was warm, and as it flowed down his throat, a strange, intoxicating calm washed over him, clouding the sharp edges of his thoughts. It felt like sinking into a warm bath after a brutal storm, and for the first time in days he felt at peace. But the peace was fragile, too delicate, and he could feel a dark undercurrent pulling him deeper. "I don't understand," Ashlar mumbled, his vision beginning to blur at the edges. "Zivah, the child, how?" The shaman's eyes burned like twin embers, and he leaned closer, so close that Ashlar could smell the decay on his breath. "The child is not yours, Ashlar," the shaman hissed, his voice rising above the crackle of the hearth. "But the truth is hidden, buried deep. To see clearly, we must cleanse your mind." And then the chanting began, an ancient guttural language that twisted the air around them like a snake coiling around its prey. Each word seemed to burrow into Ashlar's thoughts, clawing away at his memories, tearing them apart like paper in the wind. The flames of the hearth flared, turning from orange to a sickly green, and shadows writhed on the walls, taking on forms that defied reason, twisting limbs, fanged faces, slithering tendrils. Ashlar's limbs grew heavy, numbness spreading like poison through his veins. His vision darkened, the world dissolving into smears of color and shapes. He tried to hold on to the last threads of his memories, Zivah's face, the warmth of her hand, the sound of her voice. But they slipped away, swallowed by the darkness and the shaman's voice, which drummed louder and louder until it was the only thing left. When he awoke, it was as if he had slept for 1,000 years. The chanting had ceased, and the cottage around him felt dreamlike, unreal. A fog hung over his mind, dulling his senses and clouding his thoughts. The shaman's face loomed above him, triumphant, his eyes gleaming like wet stone. "Now, Ashlar," the shaman said, his voice thick with malice, "you must find Joshua. He is a danger to all that you hold dear. Seek him out and end him." Ashlar, now afraid, got up and stumbled from the cottage, the cold air biting into his lungs as he gasped for breath. The path ahead seemed endless, twisting into darkness, and he walked as though in a trance, driven by a compulsion he could not fight. But the forest, once a place of stillness, seemed to awaken around him. The branches creaked like bones, and the shadows seemed to stalk him, moving just beyond the edge of sight. Ashlar wandered through the forest, the night clinging to him like a wet shroud. The path twisted and turned in ways that made no sense, as though the very trees conspired to lead him astray. His thoughts were clouded, his purpose blurred. Only fragments remained, visions of a face he couldn't recall, a child named Joshua he was meant to find. The journey felt endless, each step heavier than the last, as if he were walking through a dream he couldn't wake from. It was then that he saw the glimmer of firelight through the branches, a small, flickering warmth against the endless black. Drawn to it like a moth, Ashlar pushed through the brambles, the thorns scraping his arms and tearing his clothes. He stumbled into a small clearing where a man sat by a fire, a cooking pot hanging over the flames, the savory scent of roasted meat filling the night air. The man looked up as Ashlar approached, his face half lit by the fire's glow, a rugged, worn face, but not unkind. He had sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, yet his expression held an odd, almost practiced calm. "Welcome, traveler," the man said, his voice warm but laced with something unreadable. He gestured to the empty space across the fire. "Come, you must be tired. Sit. Share my fire." Ashlar felt a strange compulsion to obey, the words settling into his bones like an enchantment. He nodded, feeling a heaviness in his limbs as he moved toward the fire, sitting down on the rough ground. The heat of the flames was comforting against the cold of the forest night, and Ashlar found himself relaxing, if only for a moment. "I thank you," he managed to say, his voice low and unsure. The firelight cast long shadows across the man's face, making his eyes seem to gleam in the darkness. I've been traveling for—" His voice trailed off as he tried to remember how long it had been, but the days had bled into one another, an endless journey with no clear beginning or end. And then there was the other matter, the gnawing realization that he couldn't remember why he had been traveling in the first place. He opened his mouth to speak again, but a stab of pain shot through his skull, cutting off his words. The man watched him closely, his eyes narrowing with what might have been pity, or might have been something else entirely. "You seem lost, friend," he said, leaning forward to ladle stew from the pot into a wooden bowl. "And weary, no doubt. What brings you out into this darkness?" "I'm looking for someone," Ashlar murmured, trying to pull the threads of his memory together, but they unraveled as soon as he touched them. "Someone important," he faltered, the name slipping away from him like water through his fingers. My name." He gripped his head in his hands, frustration and panic clawing at his insides. Why couldn't he remember his name? Why did everything feel so distant, so dreamlike? The man's smile widened, though it did not reach his eyes. "Do not worry," he said gently. "The forest plays tricks on the mind, steals away what is precious to us. But sit, eat, and let the fire warm your bones. All will come back to you in time." Ashlar nodded numbly, taking the bowl of stew that the man offered. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the first spoonful hit his tongue. The rich flavors exploded in his mouth, and he ate greedily, the warmth of the food easing the chill that had settled in his bones. The man watched him as he ate, his gaze unwavering as if studying Ashlar for something unseen. "You're kind," Ashlar said through mouthfuls of stew, feeling a deep, aching gratitude he couldn't quite explain. I've been so lost, so alone." He couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a fire with someone, couldn't remember anything really. Just the forest and the moon and— "You are safe now," the man said, his voice low and soothing. "Eat. Rest. Let the darkness fall away." For a time they sat in silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound that filled the night. The man occasionally stirred the pot, a soft smile playing on his lips as Ashlar ate. And yet, there was something about the way the man moved, the measured grace of his gestures, the way his eyes never wavered from Ashlar, that set the hairs on the back of Ashlar's neck standing on end. Ashlar finished his bowl, the food sitting heavy in his stomach. He felt dazed, disoriented. His eyes drooped, the world around him blurring, as if the very air had thickened into a fog. He rubbed his temples, trying to focus, but the man's voice seemed to echo through his skull, making it difficult to think. "You should rest," the man said, and there was an edge to his voice now, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. He rose to his feet, moving to Ashlar's side. "The night is long and the forest unforgiving. But you have nothing to fear, not while I'm here." Ashlar tried to respond, tried to thank him, but the words tangled on his tongue. He was so tired, the pull of sleep stronger than any force he had ever known. The world spun around him, and he clutched at his stomach, a dull ache spreading through his core. And then it all happened too fast. The man moved like a flash, one moment standing beside the fire, the next standing over Ashlar, a knife in his hand, a blade thin and wickedly sharp. Before Ashlar could react, before he could cry out, the man plunged the knife deep into his belly, the blade sliding between his ribs with a sickening ease. The pain was instant and overwhelming, a searing agony that tore through Ashlar like wildfire. His mouth opened in a scream that never came, only a strangled gasp as the breath was forced from his lungs. He tried to scramble backward, but his body was slow and unresponsive, and all he managed to do was press his back against the hard, unforgiving earth. The man was unrelenting, his face twisting into a grimace of concentration as he drove the knife upward, slicing through flesh and muscle in a single, brutal motion. The blade carved its way to Ashlar's sternum, and with a wet, tearing sound, his torso opened like a gutted animal, blood spilling over his lap, steaming in the night air. Ashlar's eyes were wide, wild with terror, his hands instinctively moving to clutch at the gaping wound, trying to hold in the insides that now spilled out between his fingers. But the man was merciless, pushing Ashlar's hands aside as though he were peeling back the layers of a ripe fruit, the blade glistening red in the firelight. "Please, please," Ashlar croaked, blood pooling in his mouth. But the man did not stop. With a grim finality, the man plunged his hand into the wound, his fingers wrapping around Ashlar's intestines. And then, with a sickening, twisting yank, he pulled, hard, and Ashlar felt his guts spill out of him in a single agonizing motion. The world became pain, endless, unimaginable pain, as Ashlar's innards slithered out of his body like serpents, falling in a steaming heap on the ground before him. The smell of iron and rot filled the air, a stench so overpowering it made his head swim. He tried to scream, but only blood bubbled from his lips, dribbling down his chin in crimson rivers. The man looked down at him, holding Ashlar's entrails in his blood-soaked hands, and his smile returned, cold, cruel, and devoid of any humanity. "I can't have you going back to kill Joshua," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath against Ashlar's ear. "The shaman's spell bound you, but this forest will be your grave. The earth will consume you, your bones never found." Ashlar's vision swam, darkness closing in at the edges as his blood poured out onto the forest floor. He felt cold, so very, very cold, and his limbs went numb, the pain fading to a distant throb as his strength left him. He tried to say something, to ask why, to curse the man, to do something, but his mouth could form no words, only a soft, rasping breath. The man tossed Asher's intestines aside, letting them hit the ground with a sickening splat. He watched as Asher's eyes fluttered, watched the life drain from them until they were only hollow, staring things, reflecting the firelight one last time before closing forever. Asher's body went limp, the last shuddering breath escaping him in a wet gurgle. The man stood, wiping the blood from his hands onto his robes, his eyes flickering like embers in the dying fire. And as Asher's blood seeped into the earth, the ground around him seemed to shift, roots and vines snaking over his body, pulling him into the soil, burying him beneath the earth. The forest swallowed Asher like a beast reclaiming its prey, the soil shifting as roots coiled around his limbs, dragging him down into the cold, dark depths. The ground beneath the man's feet quivered, a slow, almost deliberate movement, as if the forest itself were savoring this moment, this fresh offering of blood and flesh. Soon, all that remained of Asher was a tangle of displaced leaves and disturbed earth, his body pulled deep below where no sunlight would ever touch. The man stood over the spot, his expression unreadable as he watched the forest finish its gruesome work. For a long moment there was only silence, the kind that presses against the eardrums like a weight, that hums with a tension too thick to break. He breathed in deeply, the scent of fresh blood mixing with the earthy decay of the forest floor. Then he spoke, a single low murmur, his voice barely louder than the whispering wind. "Sleep now, lost one. The forest will cradle you as you fade into nothing." The fire crackled, its flames licking upward in defiance of the night, throwing dancing shadows that seemed to pulse with life. The man stepped back from the fresh grave, his eyes dark and empty as twin voids. He cleaned the blade slowly, methodically, wiping the gore away until the metal gleamed silver again, sharp as moonlight on water. With a final glance at the place where Asher's body had been swallowed, the man turned to walk away, leaving the fire to burn down to embers, he himself wisping into a fog and dispersing into the tree canopy, up to the moonlight and gone out of sight. As the man faded into the shadows, a faint shimmer caught the corner of his eye, a trace of energy, like a tear in the fabric of the world. He paused, the glimmer pulling at his thoughts like an unfinished thread. The shaman's spell had bound Asher's will, but its ripple had reached farther than intended. Somewhere, far from this cursed forest, Joshua stirred, unaware of the shadow that now stretched toward him. The forest settled back into its rhythm, trees swaying in the wind, the rustle of leaves a soft and haunting lullaby. But beneath the earth, where no one could see, Asher's body lay broken and twisted, buried in a grave of roots and thorns, consumed by the very forest that had led him to his end. And as the night grew deeper and the fire finally flickered out, the darkness seemed to thicken, an oppressive shroud that blanketed the world. Somewhere in the distance, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the trees as if the forest itself were amused by the events that had transpired, reveling in the torment it had borne witness to. There would be no mourning for Asher, no answers to the questions that had plagued him. The shadowy figure that had sent him on this path would remain a mystery, the truth of Zivah's child forever buried with him beneath the earth. And in the forest where ancient secrets whispered through the branches, and where blood and soil mixed like old lovers, the cycle of lies and darkness continued uninterrupted. In the cold, still silence of the woods, all that remained was the distant memory of a man who had sought the truth and found only death. A truth more bitter than any blade, and a death as cruel as the night itself. This chapter may have ended, but the story doesn't. Return next Monday for what waits in the dark. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and leave a comment to share what the shadows may have whispered to you.